Kiza was leading the children in a sing-along when the announcement rang across the ship. Keeping the sing-along going, Kiza tried to use the universal expression of, "What the hell does that mean?" to their manager, Godfrey, a short man wearing all red with a large belly and a very long white beard. Unfortunately for Kiza, the Godfrey responded with the universal expression of, "How should I know? I only work here." Kiza responded with a stare as deadly as they could manage, while also singing songs about dying of disease and burning the bodies, while the children sang along and ran around, careful not to touch each other. Hide away, keep 6 feet away. Hide away, she brought us down today. The children chanted, while Kiza managed to wade through the sea of children to make it to their boss. "How is quarantine supposed to work?" they asked Godfrey, who only shrugged again. He was reading through a booklet of procedures before he finally made it to the section that addressed the kids' zone. The Naglfari was one of the best cruise ships of its generation, so naturally it had a kids' zone, a walled-off section of the ship filled with play structures, a splash pool, wide open area for playing, even an arcade and a kitchen. The kids' zone was sealed off from the rest of the ship via a set of waterproof glass doors. Kiza was unsure of the exact specifications of the doors, but they were supposed to keep the kids' zone safe from an explosive flood of water in case the ship started sinking. It even had curtains on the inside, so when it was closed, lights could be kept inside. Okay, so per quarantine procedure, the staff at the kids' zone are expected to stay with the children until the parents come to pick them up. Then the staff are to head to their quarters to await further instructions. Godfrey read, before lifting his eyes up from the manual to see Kiza's red face. "I don't suppose it mentioned what to do if the parents don't show up, does it?" they asked. Most of the parents of this trip were good at picking up their kids at the end of closing, but there were 2 children, Adriana and Michael, who had parents that waited until well after closing to pick up their children. At one point, Michael was there well past midnight with Kiza, waiting for his father to show up. He showed up drunk and stumbling, not even self-aware enough to apologize, while his half-asleep son guided them back to the cabin. Kiza remembered that day well because Godfrey went back to his cabin at 6 p.m., and he refused to start an investigation for neglect. He stated that parents sometimes showed up late. It didn't mean anything was happening. The fact that Kiza had to be back at work at 7 a.m. and wasn't able to sleep until the witching hour didn't mean anything to their boss. No, the manual just says to stay with them until their parents come to pick them up. "I swear, Godfrey, if I'm stuck here past midnight, alone, again, you know I'm going to quit." "Relax, that's not going to happen this time." "What makes you say that?" "Well, if you quit, then I'll just toss you overboard," Godfrey joked. So Kiza responded by sighing. "I'm serious. I don't want to be here past midnight again. Once was enough, and I didn't even get overtime for that," Kiza explained. "Well, tell you what, if Michael's dad doesn't come back here, I'll stay with you the whole time, even if it takes all night," Godfrey promised. "I'll hold you to it," Kiza said before they plastered on their customer service smile when the first round of concerned parents arrived, while they have the forms for the parents to sign to get to their children. Working with children had a lot of challenges, but one of the biggest people forget about is the paperwork. Every activity had to be written down and approved a week ahead of time. Forms for injuries, forms for signing in, forms for signing out. And that was before anything complicated like medication, allergies, accommodations, injuries, or special requests. Good gods, the special request forms were always extensive. Kiza had to read through each and every one, and usually it was for something simple like a fear of clowns or an allergy they couldn't easily list earlier. But other times their requests were something truly trying, such as getting the children into the captain's quarters, or getting them to dive into the ocean while the ship was still moving. One strange parent had a 15-page request that could be summed up as, "Teach my child to make cheese." But the forms had to be filled out, or as far as the corporate powers that be were concerned, it never happened. A forgotten play plan, or a child being signed out without being signed in, were considered greater misgivings than all the 7 deadly sins combined. And parents were already impatient without quarantine announced. The quarantine only made them even more impatient. "Why do I even need to sign out my child? You saw me here earlier today," one parent with pink hair and carrying a stuffed shrimp asked Kiza. Only the 8th person to ask Kiza that very same question, while they had to have the corporate-approved answer. "We just want to be safe rather than sorry," Kiza said with a reassuring smile while they bit back the real reason. There were over 200 children visiting the Kids Zone every day, most of which were dropped off by parents who spent less than a minute that entire trip speaking to Kiza. They could barely remember what they had for breakfast, let alone the face of a bored parent who couldn't even say 3 words to Kiza. Especially when there's over 400 parents who all did the exact same thing. But Kiza knew it would be a hopeless cause explaining that to the parents, who assumed that the center of their universes was also the center of everyone else's universe. So Kiza focused on their job, checking out children one at a time, and on the odd quiet moment they had to go back to their children who remained. After all, it wasn't like Godfrey was going to do anything about that. Making sure that the children were all still alright, and more importantly, that they were all having fun. There were 40 children in the Kids Zone when quarantine was announced. In 2 minutes, there were only 30. Then there were 25. Then 18, 15, 13, 9, 4, then finally 2. 30 minutes after quarantine was announced, the only children left were Michael and Adriana. Michael was off in the painting corner, just painting what he imagined Primeval looked like. Vast grasslands and tons of dinosaurs. Other children were nervous, or at least aware of the quarantine announcement. Michael was painting when the announcement was made, and he was still painting, just like every other day in the Kids Zone. Adriana was a different story. She had a rag doll in her arm that kept her company. She loved playing the games in the arcade, but usually couldn't get into the games she wanted because they were always crowded with other children. But now she was having the time of her life when there was no one else to bother her. "I'm getting worried. Their parents still aren't here. Are we going to quarantine them with us?" Kiza asked their boss, who was still flipping through the manual, trying to find some information he missed before. Even though it had been over 30 minutes at this point and no new information was found, he was still looking for something new. Anything new. No. Yes. I don't know. What do you expect me? You expect me to know something? This is my first cruise. You're my boss. I thought you'd know something I don't know. Isn't there some kind of secret manager manual or training that I wasn't allowed to go to that you went to? Kiza asked Godfrey, who only stared back at them. No, we aren't given a secret manual. Everyone on the ship is given the same manual. Only difference between me and you is I have the key, and I get asked all the questions from above. Don't you make more than me? Trust me, that difference is smaller than you think. My job isn't to have all the answers just because I'm in charge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go speak to the captain. He must know what to do since he's in charge, Godfrey said without the smallest hint of irony and without any connection between the separate thoughts. Uh-huh. So in other words, you're leaving me alone with the kids while you head to your room, Kiza pointed out. No, I'm not going back to my room. I'm getting help so we know what to do. I won't be gone for long. Uh-huh. You know I'm going to keep my word. Sure. Don't talk like that. Talk like what? Like you don't believe me. What makes you think I don't believe you? Kiza asked, their arms crossed and their foot tapping. They didn't need to say anything. They both knew that Godfrey already established himself as someone who didn't follow through. And now he was in a situation where he had to prove he was being honest. After a moment, he reached into his shirt and pulled out a lanyard that had a large key on it. The key to the front doors of the Kid Zone. Without it, he couldn't lock up the Kid Zone, nor unlock it to let himself in. Here, take this. If their parents come back before I do, then you can lock up and go to your cabin. But now, you know I'll keep my word. I can't go back to my room without my key, Godfrey told Kiza. Kiza knew this was true. The manager was supposed to have the key at all times. Without having the key, if Godfrey's boss found out, Godfrey could be written up or even fired. You going to be okay? Kiza asked, their fingers dangling near the key that Godfrey was offering. Yeah, I'm sure. Like I said, I won't be gone long. I just want to check with the captain, Godfrey answered. Kiza thought about it for a moment longer before taking the key and putting the lanyard in their pocket. Godfrey nodded before walking out the front door from the Kid Zone to the main deck. Outside of the Kid Zone, Kiza could see that the lights were mostly off. Somewhere between a half and 1/3 of the lights were still on. But for the most part, the deck was dark and quiet. Cruise ships were normally busy places. Even at night, there were people running by, or people chatting and drinking, or at least staff moving things along, getting work done at night they couldn't get done during the day. Laughter and life flourished, even during the witching hour. Here, during the quarantine, it was like something from a horror movie. Something caused everyone to hide away, and Kiza couldn't help but feel like they had to hide also. So, locking the glass door behind Godfrey, they headed back to the children. Sure enough, Adriana was still playing pachinko by herself, trying to win herself a horse toy. Michael was still quiet and moved on to a new canvas, leaving his old one to dry in its easel. The children safe, Kiza decided now was a great time to focus on their paperwork. Finally getting a chance to catch up while the children and Godfrey were gone. Kiza wasn't sure how long they were working on paperwork, but they realized it must have been a long time when they were fully caught up with everything, and no one knocked at the door, and both Adriana and Michael were still playing alone. Checking their watch, Kiza saw that it had been 2 hours since quarantine had been declared, and still Adriana and Michael's parents hadn't arrived. Godfrey was also still out. No way it took him 2 hours to find the captain. He definitely left Kiza to deal with the children. Alone. Again. Sighing to themselves, they went to the door to see if they were missing something. Sometimes hints could be seen if you got closer to the problem. At first, it looked like Michael left brown paint on the glass. But then as Kiza got closer, they realized that the paint was on the other side of the glass. Long streaks and brown handprints were left along the glass, looking like a surrealist painting about starvation. At least until Kiza got closer and stopped in their tracks. Outside the Kid Zone were dozens of dark eyes. Numerous people were crowding against the glass. Hands and even faces were pressed against it. Their bodies left viscous blood from their wounds against the glass. The ones that still had their eyes just looked so wrong. They didn't reflect light correctly. Their eyes were glazed over and covered in a thin film that was the same color as their wounds. But their eyes, unfocused as they were, followed Kiza, following them as they got closer. And behind the ones pressed against the glass, Kiza could see that others were coming, and they were all fighting to get closer to the glass. Glass built to withstand the full force of the ocean, more than strong enough to keep them out indefinitely. At least, that's what Kiza hoped was true. Seeing their eyes and the way they moved like a perpetual video game glitch, jerking and twitching into position and trying to break through, looking at them, Kiza could feel a primal fear drip down their spine. Something about what was outside made every single cell in their body scream danger. It pushed them to hide from what was out there, even if there was no way they could get in. Turning around to look at the children, Kiza could see they were still distracted, but if they came to the front, they could see very clearly that their parents weren't there to pick them up. That something was much, much worse. And it was just outside, trying to get in. What could they do? Kiza's mind racing, their eyes fell on the curtain. Large curtains that could cover the entire glass and keep the abominations from outside from looking in. And could keep Kiza, or the kids, from looking outside. Grabbing the rod, Kiza moved the curtain across the glass. Despite not being able to smell or hear the creatures outside, they shivered. Something deep inside them knew that they smelled rotten, and that they moaned like the wind in an empty valley. Something that caused Kiza to shudder and shiver despite the warmth of the kid zone. The curtain now fully covering the glass, Kiza turned off the front lights and returned to Adriana and Michael. Remembering the captain's word that the Vanguard would be arriving soon meant that help was on the way, or at least it had to be on the way. You'd have to cut through the creatures, but that still meant help was going to get there. Okay, so I just got word. We're going to have a sleepover tonight, Kiza improvised, not sure what else could be said. Adriana stopped playing pachinko with her horse in one arm and her ragdoll in the other arm. She was very clearly excited, probably realizing this meant she could win more horses. Michael looked up for a moment before going back to his painting. He was only bored, but still, at least no one was going to try to go out the front. Okay, so I'm going to go get snacks. You two keep back here, Kiza said as they walked to the small kitchen. Their hands were shaking when they went through. When they closed the door to the kitchen, a loud sob escaped their throat. There were monsters outside, and the children were in danger, even if they didn't know it. Taking a deep breath, Kiza did their best to project calmness. They glanced at themselves at a mirror in the kitchen. Seeing terror, they closed their eyes and took a deep breath. Opening their eyes, they couldn't see the terror anymore. It was okay to feel the fear, but the important part wasn't to panic. There would be time to panic after the danger has passed. If they panicked now, they would never get a chance to see what was after the danger. A feeling of control, if not calm, settled over Kiza, and their hands stopped shaking. It's just a sleepover. Get the kids away from the glass, turn the lights off, and make sure they have snacks. There should be enough snacks for a few weeks. Children, eat a lot, and typically there were enough snacks to last a few days for 200 children. That translated to more than enough for 2 children to eat, or 2 children and 1 adult. So Kiza grabbed 4 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches from the fridge, before pausing for a moment and grabbing 2 more sandwiches for themselves. They also didn't eat all day, and they were just starting to feel hungry, so it made sense to grab some food also. It was really easy to forget about food unless you were holding it. Carrying the armfuls of sandwiches to the main floor, Kiza saw that the kids were still doing their thing, so they called out. Like I said, I was given word. We're going to have a sleepover here in the kids zone until the quarantine is over and the Vanguard comes to get us. 1 lie, 1 truth, and 1 hopeful statement. All of which Kiza hoped that the children couldn't tell what was what. They turned to face Kiza with big eyes. Their mouths dropped open and they ran over to Kiza with their arms outstretched. Kiza's breath caught in their throat until they felt the children's arms wrap around their legs in the tight hugs kids do when they wanted to be close. Food! They yelled in unison, and Kiza let out a chuckle. Turns out the kids were hungry too. And thankfully they weren't hungry for flesh. Just for some nice, safe sandwiches. Dragging their legs, and the kids, forward to the large play area, Kiza took out the picnic basket and laid it on the floor. It was only taken out on special occasions, but Kiza figured this counted. Okay, so I have 2 sandwiches for each of us. If you need more, let me know, Kiza began, before both Michael and Adriana tore a sandwich each out of Kiza's arms. Already ripping the plastic off and tearing into the cheap sandwiches like it was ambrosia of the gods. You're welcome, Kiza said in a tone indicating that this was a learning opportunity. Thank you, Kiza, they both said in unison, and Kiza smiled before opening their own sandwich and eating into it. They were never too much of a fan of peanut butter and jelly. It was usually too sweet for their taste. But tonight it truly felt like a blessing just to have some food in a safe sanctuary. Kiza ate quietly while Adriana talked about the game she played, and Michael listened politely. By the time the next rounds of sandwiches were open, everyone was eating more calmly, and Michael was talking about the dinosaurs he was painting. He would tell Adriana and Kiza about different climates on Primeval and how it would affect adaptation. Both children could not fully understand why the other enjoyed what they enjoyed so much, but they were just enjoying the fact that it brought happiness. Something that always brought a smile to Kiza's face. At least until they remembered what was waiting in the front of the kid zone. Then their smile was then gone. And their hands started shaking again. Taking a deep breath, Kiza asked, "Why don't you 2 start building a blanket and pillow fort in the play area? I'm going to go get a movie." This brought a spring into the children's step as they both ran off to collect the pillows and blankets. Naturally, there were quite a few in the kids zone. Some children were young enough to need naps. Kiza walked to the front, their hands still shaking as they approached the curtain. They couldn't hear anything behind the glass, but that didn't mean anything. They didn't hear anything earlier, but that didn't really mean nothing, when earlier no sound was heard also. Only a few feet away from the curtains, Kiza felt their hands shake so much it was like they were shivering. Here they were. The truth of what was happening out there was close enough for them to see for themselves. All they had to do was move the curtain enough to peek through. But Kiza could feel the fear overwhelm their heart. In their mind they saw a nightmare horde coating the entire ship. An ocean's worth of undead pressing against the glass and mere seconds away from shattering it. You could turn back, Kiza told himself. It would be real easy. Turn around, grab the case with the movie. The unknown would stay unknown, and ignorance would be bliss. Wouldn't it? Except it wouldn't be bliss, they reminded themselves. They knew the undead was out there. And if they didn't look behind the curtain, then it didn't matter how bad it was. Their imagination would make it worse, and panic would be a lot harder to fight. That knowledge made the choice for Kiza. Even if it was as bad as their imagination, it was better to be aware of it than to be ignorant and fearful. Taking a deep breath, they stepped forward and moved the curtain aside a single inch so their left eye could peer out. At first, fear kept their eyes tense and closed, but after a moment they gradually relaxed, opening their eyes to look out into the weak light of the main deck outside. And what they saw was nothing. Well, not truly nothing. There was brown blood scabbing on the glass, and a few figures were seen wandering around the deck in the distance, but no undead were pressed into the glass. No one and nothing was trying to get into the kid zone. The dead were attracted to the light, but with the curtains closed and the lights turned off, they couldn't care less about the kid zone. Kiza was safe. The kids were safe. They were going to be okay until the vanguard arrived. Letting out a breath they didn't know they were holding, Kiza let go of the curtain and looked at their hands. Their hands were no longer shaking, and they were finally able to relax. The kids were safe, and they were all going to stay safe. And Kiza knew it would stay that way. Turning away from the outside world, they turned back to the desk and made their movie selections. They would have the entire night to watch all the movies, but Kiza was comfortable with that. Now they knew it wasn't as bad as they feared. They figured there was now room to let things be better than they could hope for.